everybody, and welcome to the Total Soccer Show. My name is Taylor Rockwell, and today, while Joe continues to wander the wilds of South Dakota, I'm joined by the man who has covered between 1 and 1,000 games this summer. It's Jeff Reuter. Hello, Jeff. How you doing, my friend?
I'm good. It's funny. Joe has arguably never been geographically closer to me at a time we haven't seen each other, and yet he feels so distant right now.
I know, man. I'm sad for that. I believe he is visiting in-laws in South Dakota, who I believe moved from Minnesota. So I feel like that was a personal thing. They knew you were there. They didn't want him too close to you, so they moved to a different state.
Sure. I just wish he was visiting some outlaws from South Dakota. That is like a 50 times better story, frankly.
I would enjoy that.
No offense to his in-laws. I'm sure they're lovely folk. I'm sure they are. Don't get in trouble, Joe. You're doing great.
If Joe is associating with outlaws, I'm assuming he's doing the books. Joe doesn't strike me as outlaw necessarily, more as like the accountant for the outlaws.
Or like the guy in the heist who has to be face forward, front and center, and talk to the person who's getting swindled to give him a false sense of security, right? Like I think Joe could do that and just kind of ramble about like these really cool like homegrown players who've been breaking out this year and gotten 400 minutes for their club, and this is why they look like they could make it, down the road for the USMNT national team. Like, I think that you could get a 30-minute diatribe going there, and that's plenty of time for us to do the rest of our thing.
That is a perfect point, Jeff. My question then becomes, I feel like usually in the movie, when the character does that, when it's Matt Damon in Ocean's 11, the glasses go on. Do the glasses go off when Joe does that role? Or does he put on a second pair of glasses?
Yeah, I think then he takes off his hat and unfurls like a ponytail that no one knew that he had, and everyone is just so, like, who is this man of mystery? We thought we knew Joe Lowry, and suddenly it's Jose. What's going on?
Well, Joe is not with us, but we will be talking about some things of, I'm assuming, interest to Joe, including the MLS All-Star selections, a few players on the move in Major League Soccer. But we're going to start with the Gold Cup because Jeff was there on location for the USA's shootout win and for Canada's shootout loss. I guess you could say Guatemala shootout win if you wanted to. We're going to talk U.S., we're going to talk Canada. But first, Jeff, how was the day covering 2 games, a doubleheader? How long were you at that stadium?
I was at the stadium for 8.5 hours, which is a long time. But it was interesting because it would have been longer, but thank your union rep, because the stadium workers union had to get there earlier, and there was like a mandate of you can't work more than 11 hours in a day. So there was like a hard cut. The game with the U.S. and Costa Rica ended around 8:30 Central. We go down to the press conferences, and it was pretty much like you can go back to the press box and have 30 minutes to keep writing, but we are kicking you out at 10 o'clock sharp because we need to send everyone home for labor reasons.
That's
and
fair.
So I ended up writing the other story from home in sweats, which is always my preference, frankly. So like I'm not mad. But it was a long day.
Sweat's kind of frowned upon in the press box, and I'm assuming also in the summer, probably. It's a 1-2 punch there.
Yeah, you need to like really crank the AC to your preference, and maybe if you have like a little fan in the corner that you can just rotate your way, just to enable yourself to bundle up. I don't know why this is like, it's so weird that like we're going to try to push ourselves to one extreme so we can find comfort in the other. But yeah, that's
human nature, my friend. Human nature.
It's life in your 30s too.
Also that. What was the atmosphere like from one game to the next? Is it like largely the same attendance? Was it a smaller group for the Canada game?
I'm actually really glad you asked, because this isn't something I really got to write about. I have never... Okay, so it's been like a kind of rolling discussion point since... I don't know when, COVID, that the USMNT national team has really struggled to foster like a strong home atmosphere, right? And it's no fault of like the diehard fans who are doing their best in the corner, but it's mostly about the like the non-2000 supporters, right? And the rest of them fostering that atmosphere. And because the prices are so high, maybe they're not engaging in the same way that maybe you would see as someone who's getting in at the door at a cheaper price, right? The best atmosphere was not the U.S.'s atmosphere. And respect to Costa Rica, it felt like a really good Costa Rica contingent and fan as well. By far, the best represented fan base was Guatemala's, which was so cool, because Canada also has this tricky problem where if they're not playing in Canada, they struggle to have that sort of atmosphere. Jesse Marsch talked about it on Matchday -1 as well. Tejan Buchanan nodded kind of bemusedly when he said it. And Guatemala had so many fans. They were in the quarterfinal. This is the first time that they've made the Gold Cup semifinal now since 1996. It is like one of the biggest runs that they've had in the region in program history. And they were so well supported. There's a bit of a Guatemalan community up in the Twin Cities, but I'd imagine it was a big pull factor. We get to play Canada. We get to play in, frankly, a state that's been less wreaked havoc for immigrants than a lot of others in the country. And so I think that there's maybe a little bit of a safety factor and component there. There was no ICE presence that I could discern. I didn't see any balaclavas. I didn't see any, Amazon $20 vests that were draped over tan T-shirts. So that's good. That's encouraging. Security seemed to work.
Times there.
Sign of the times. I know, man. But I was on a lookout. I was doing a lap around the stadium before I went in. Probably just like enjoying sunlight, natural sunlight, without the obstruction of glass one last time before I went in. But I digress. Guatemala really brought fantastic support, and they really fed off of it. It was like kind of a wrestling match at a point after the calls started coming, and like Jonathan David converts his penalty and they disagree with the ref's call, and so it was getting loud. And I don't know if anyone ever watched the NFL, you've seen the Vikings stadium, and they do that like kind of drum clap sort of thing, and you can hear it resonate because of how the acoustics are designed with the stadium. But when you have a bunch of like angry CONCACAF fans going after an official in a competitive CONCACAF match, like it just like reverberates and creates this atmosphere where it really was like almost like Guatemala was hosting a World Cup qualifier. And that was like just such a really cool atmosphere that I was not prepared for. I'm comparing it to 7 years ago now, I would say 6 years ago, when the Gold Cup last came to Minnesota and was in St. Paul at Allianz Field. Not nearly the same atmosphere, because I think it was like Haiti, and then it was the U.S. versus Trinidad and Tobago. And so I think really good for the Gold Cup to get those sorts of games with those crowds, and the team certainly fed off of it. And I think it's no small part of why they were able to find their moments and pull off that comeback.
Let's stick with Canada then. We'll talk about Guatemala later on. But with this Canadian team, I made jokes about Jesse Marsch's comments yesterday. Many people have poked fun at Jesse Marsch's post-game comments and a lot of his other behavior in this tournament. But he talked a little bit about missing half of his team or half of the pool, and so they kind of made do. I want to start there. How strong was this Canada team actually? Like, relating it to the United States, let's say, which is missing more or less like the entire starting 11, give or take some center backs and maybe an attacker. Like, you could throw it up for debate, maybe Tyler Adams. Like, by contrast, how many players were Canada missing that are truly out and out starters, do you think?
Less than half. Okay. 2 by my count. Like 2 obvious ones where you have Alphonso Davies and you have Steven Eustáquio, whose situation with Porto has gotten really sour, and it was like they didn't want to release him, but he really wanted to go, but then they didn't want to play him in the Club World Cup. They just didn't want him to get hurt so that it scuppered a chance of selling him this summer, basically. So those 2 are and then Davies, of course, with his injury, those are very understandable absences. But when you really look at it, they were pulling, maybe there's some center back depth that they would have rather brought, or starting center backs, and thrusting Derek Cornelius into, lead center back stuff, and Nathan Saliba in midfield and whatever. So you've got some players missing, but not nearly to the extent that he was saying after the game. It was also pretty rich because going into the tournament, he was kind of thumping his chest and saying, the U.S. is having all these issues of players not wanting to be there. We didn't have a single player asked to miss this tournament. Every single player was a selection decision. And then in hindsight now you hear, okay, Eustáquio wasn't released and Davies wasn't able to go, but we always knew he wouldn't. But it just seemed like a little bit of revisionist history to come in and say we're missing half of our guys, because like at the surface, I think that a lot of people who are very casually following the squad stuff, people who don't listen to podcasts like these or read websites like The Athletic to try to get their sense of like and backheeled of where selections were made and who was left off and stuff like that. If you just kind of like, oh, the Gold Cup's on, okay, let's go watch, and you hear the coach say we're missing half our team, you'd look at the U.S. roster right afterwards and be like, oh yeah, probably. But yeah, it really didn't kind of pass the lie detector in the moment.
So I would like to talk Marsch for a second, and I would like to do so not through an immediately snarky lens. We can get to the snark, or you can go right in that direction if you so choose. But Great. I feel like from an American perspective, so much of his pre-game comments, post-game comments, pre-tournament comments of his tenure as Canadian manager has been, it feels like, with an eye towards the U.S. gig, not getting the U.S. gig, bitterness towards the United States. And that is, again, I'm saying, like, maybe my bias, maybe it's what I have seen, but it feels like so many of his comments are shaded towards the U.S. or taking little shots at the United States or little shots at the setup of the U.S. And I'm wondering how much that vibes with your experience of Jesse Marsch as Canada manager.
Yeah, Jesse Marsch, Canada manager, is a very different sort of interview than Jesse Marsch, Red Bulls manager, Leeds manager, former Leeds manager, talking head, whatever the case may be. And part of this, I think, is just understandable. Like, as man progresses in his life, he wears many different hats and evolves in certain different ways as he wears them, whatever, right? Like, fine. But I think that...
How's that philosophy degree working out for you, Jeff?
I took one ethics class.
There we go.
First year, freshman year. No, I think that he's still figuring it out. I think that he's figuring out less about the... there's always that balance that we've talked about in past episodes where, how much can a former club manager really expect to bring in a rigid structure like they're used to fostering when they're tactically building their teams on the club side, and transfer that over to the international realm where you only see them every couple of months and only for 2 weeks at a time, and you're not primarily training them. He was pretty indignant throughout all of this. I'm trying not to be snarky about how he didn't believe the thing that everyone says, that you can only do so much to help your international players develop as an international coach. And he was like, no, we're really kind of forcing them to. But at the end of the day, like, you look at the balance of his schedule, and yes, inherently a club manager will always, or even two club managers in 1 year, if you make a coaching change, will have more time than any one international manager will get with those players. Okay, so you do have some players who aren't quite perfect fits for a Marsch system. You wouldn't necessarily say, okay, if he was with New York, or if he was with Leeds, or if he was with Leipzig or Salzburg, doesn't really matter the stop. Just kind of imagine Marsch building a team and looking for players who are the tactical profile. It's impossible to be able to say that the top 50 players in Canada has 26 players who are a perfect fit for that system. So there's already some trade-offs that maybe should be made, but he is still being very aggressive with it, and he wants to have, he had a kind of good one-liner at the matchday -1, who was when he was like, I don't want to reveal too much more beyond Dane St. Clair starting in goal, but maybe this will be too much of a secret, but we're going to press and we're going to counter press. And it's like, yeah, okay, correct. We did know that, but thanks, Jesse. And so it is staunch commitment to that bit, and it's worked very well at times. You saw it in the Copa America knockouts against Venezuela and getting them into that third place game and getting to a shootout against Uruguay, against Bielsa, right? So I think overall there's I don't even really know how to put this. I think that he is still figuring out some of maybe the soft side of international management, and maybe is very, very good at, let's say, the hard side of international management. But that soft side is ultimately the one that kind of the margins can be won and lost by. And you compare that very quickly to Mauricio Pochettino, who had really struggled through his first 6 months, I would say, through the Nations League as USMNT's national team manager. And then comes into this tournament, and he's, we were asking the shootout, were you ever worried at any point? He was just like, no, I've learned with this group of players and most teams I've ever coached that it's really important to stay calm and confident, because then the players look to you, they see that and they internalize that, rather than, a coach who's running around and pointing and screaming and all these sorts of things. And I think that, again, we'll get to the U.S. men's national team later. I think that he's improved leaps and bounds through this tournament, and just at learning kind of some of those nuances of international soccer. Is it going to come in time for 2026? Who knows? But that's the gamble U.S. soccer made. But he does look like he's making that progress. And I think that, to go to something that my colleague Josh Cloak, who's our beat writer covering the Canada men's national team, put out yesterday, a very good piece. It's the soft stuff, I think, is ultimately where Jesse Marsch has the steepest learning curve left. And it's things like substitution patterns. It's things like calming players down when temperatures are starting to rise. It's things like going to Jacob Schaffelberg after a first yellow card that you disagreed with, apparently, and saying, hey, we cannot get you sent off here. You need to stop throwing elbows, which is what ended up getting him sent off. You need to stop, really going in with reckless abandon and just take it down a little bit. We just need to get to halftime. We're going to get a goal. It's okay. So I don't know. I think that it was an interesting one, right? That game against Guatemala was just a very interesting sort of, we've seen that performance before, but maybe we've expected it more from red, white, and blue, or green and red teams rather than from Canada.
How big of a loss do you feel like that was, given it's, these are the last competitive games before the World Cup? They'll have friendlies, but this is an opportunity to advance in a tournament. It felt like they had targeted advancing in this tournament, maybe making the final, maybe winning the whole thing. So how big of a blow is that to his plans as manager?
It's massive, because I think that when you entered qualifying last cycle, the idea was pretty much if they could qualify, that was amazing. It was only when they won qualifying, when they beat both the United States and Mexico at home, that's when it really started to look like, whoa, this might actually be a team that could go on to be a force, right? Rather than just they're the Costa Rica of this decade, right? Where throughout the 2010s, Costa Rica was kind of always the third team in CONCACAF, but they were a third team that would win things and that would really frustrate the U.S. and Mexico. And so expectations shifted as a result of them beating those two programs and every other program in CONCACAF when qualifying for Qatar. Then they finished 32nd, not great. So you need to kind of rebuild and go again. John Herdman scandal. The first time I saw a drone at U.S. training, my first thought was, is Herdman here? So you get to these games, and you have Jesse Marsch, and you kind of need that sort of like statement win, that sort of like top of your resume result. And you could say fourth place at the Copa America. You could say third place at the Nations League. But none of those are like soft successes, right? And so like I think that the Gold Cup was seen as a chance for this group to win a trophy, to have dominance in a CONCACAF competition. And I just like, I don't know, I guess from your perspective here, like I'm really curious, how do you perceive, like I know like blind ranking is such a thing on social media now, but just like generally, correct me if I'm wrong, but the top 4 teams in CONCACAF, United States, Mexico, Canada, Panama, right? I'm not being harsh to, I know it's the Nations League semifinals, but like where do you put Canada? Just in your feels like index, or what you've seen in this Gold Cup, in past tournaments, whatever the case may be, like do you feel that where do you feel Canada is in that hierarchy compared to 2022 when they entered the World Cup top of the region?
It's a really good question, and it's a confusing, I think, circuitous answer. Not surprisingly, that's kind of my brand. But like to your point, the way they qualify, how strong they looked leading up to the 2022 World Cup, it felt like if there's a CONCACAF team that's going to make a run, given what the U.S. was looking like in their group, given what Mexico had been looking like, I think I predicted that Mexico would make their deepest run ever. That obviously didn't happen. But Canada felt like they were in the strongest position and had the most kind of confidence, the best vibes. And then, as you said, they finished last in the tournament. Then there are all the issues with the federation from a money perspective. Then there's the drone issues on top of that. And so what felt like a very stable, consistent forward progress program now feels like a confusing enigma of a strong team with a good pool of players that don't have a great federation running them, that don't have a ton of support. And so it's then uncertain how much progress they're actually making, how consistently they are developing as a nation. So to your point, I probably would have put them prior to this tournament first or second in CONCACAF, which I'm now realizing I don't really have a reason for that other than they have Alphonso Davies, they have Jonathan David, they have Tejan Buchanan rather. They've got lots of other very talented players, some of whom weren't at this tournament, as you said. They've got lots of kind of squad depth who weren't at this tournament. And so it feels like on their day they can be one of the best teams, if not the best team in CONCACAF. But also they finished third at the Nations League ahead of the United States, credit where credit's due. They get knocked out here by Guatemala, and there is, I guess, a feeling of like they're a very potentially good team that haven't yet put it together. And I thought maybe Jesse Marsch could be a motivating factor in that one, could kind of kick them on from John Herdman and could, if not fully evolve them, then at the very least, I don't know, motivate them to achieve at a different level or more consistently at a higher level. And I guess I would say that doesn't feel like it has happened thus far.
And it's interesting because the coaching hire, we talk about with the U.S. and it was like, how much are you really going to see benefits and growth when you switch out Berhalter and bring in Pochettino, right? And it's such a funny question for a club fan, right? Like they hear that and they're just like, what are you talking about? But like, there are these sorts of intricacies and nuance where you have to look at what is a coach going to be able to change about these teams that are seemingly underperforming compared to their talent level and potential. And when you look at Canada, it seems like it's almost a perfect situation to walk into as a manager who only was going to have so much control over the tactical identity because of those scarcities of windows. And so the strengths of Canada are along the flanks, right? You've got some good fullbacks. I like Alistair Johnston a lot. On the left back, Richie Larea now has kind of stepped into that role since Alphonso Davies has moved into a more advanced position. And I think that either of them are great in the role. I prefer Davies there, obviously. I think it makes sense to keep him back there, but I understand why Canada wants him in the final third as often as they do. And then you have really good wingers, and then you have a great depth of strikers for the region, right? Like, I mean, you've got Daniel Jebison is back on loan, away from Bournemouth this year, but he did get some good minutes off the bench in the Premier League last year. Promise David coming into a role. Kyle Larin, is still out there, still kicking. Kind of the elder statesman of the group now. You've got Jonathan David, of course. You've got Tony Oluwaseyi, kind of still emerging, still figuring his role out with Canada, but really coming into his own in Major League Soccer. And so really your jobs are to, how do I get a coherent midfield that can progress the ball and slow down a progression upfield for the opponent, and how do I get a defense that's going to be stabilized and tough to break down? If you only really have to focus, and I'm not trying to trivialize the job of a manager, right? It's obviously always harder than we make it sound when we talk about it on shows like these. But if your primary focuses are, how do I get a stronghold defense, 2 center backs, 3 center backs, I've got to make that decision. I've got to get them in lockstep with their goalkeeper. And how do I get the midfield set up to help the wide players around them? That seems like something that a coach can really easily curate, adjust themselves, and then have their sort of impact over the style as a result, while having the wide players and the attackers that they can trust, who can do the tough stuff to teach, like wrestle control of a game and score against the run of play and feast in transition and these sorts of things that are just like, either you got it or you don't. So I don't know, it just seems like such an ideal player pool for someone like Jesse Marsch, where it's surprising when they have these sorts of mental gaffes. That's like, oh yeah, that's another side of it too, isn't it? just telling guys like, hey, just you're okay. You're okay. Just see this game out. And it just seems like there was always this, I think 2 of the words that he had used the day before was like dominant and ferocious. He used aggressive, and it's just these sorts of things where it's like, if you hear that as a player, you want to run through a brick wall, right? Like, you want to shadow box for a while and all this sort of stuff, and that's great. But sometimes you do also need to be we're the favorite in this, and in this tournament, our goal is to project confidence of a favorite.
That is very well said. I want to continue to talk about Canada. Let's take a break. We'll come back. We'll talk a little more Canada. We'll talk a little more Guatemala. We'll talk a little more U.S. Back soon. Welcome back to the Total Soccer Show. We're continuing to talk about Canada under Jesse Marsch. I wasn't sure how long we would end up talking about him, but now I have, I think, 6 more questions, a few more statements. We won't get to all of them because we will keep it moving. But I think it's just an interesting point for Canadian soccer. And I think it's representative of the state of CONCACAF as a whole, that, to your question of where I would rank them, to your initial question of where I would rank them, I kind of think all of CONCACAF is sort of a hodgepodge at the top. I'm never going to say Mexico are pushovers or Mexico are weaker than the United States. Mm-hmm. Even when they are objectively weaker, it's still Mexico playing the U.S. They're always capable of springing a surprise. I would say the same of Costa Rica. I would say the same of Panama. And I think I would obviously put Canada on that list as well. I think with Jesse Marsch as coach, with the player pool they have, I think any game against the U.S. is always going to be a difficult contest, especially if it's in Canada. And so I think that is, in a way, progress, which is maybe damning with faint praise. But, I mean, Canada, before 2020, really?
Yeah.
It's sort of a team that you always expect you're going to beat 2 or 3-0. They're not going to be that big of a challenge. Maybe they'll spring a surprise, but likely not. And now I think of CONCACAF as being sort of, right now with the U.S. in the situation it's in, I think it is a sort of closer, little bit of a hodgepodge at present. Maybe you add the U.S.'s first teamers back in and give Pochettino a few more games, and maybe the U.S. does separate itself a little bit. Maybe the same could be said of Mexico. But it doesn't feel like Canada has really made that progress as yet under Jesse Marsch. We'll see how things go with their friendlies remaining. You mentioned some of the lesser-known names or the less heralded names that have kind of stepped up. Can we run through a few of those? Who impressed you from Canada, either on the day or in this tournament, who maybe wouldn't otherwise have been in that first team or wouldn't get as much ink spilled about them?
Well, I think with Eustáquio out, I think Nico Segura actually had a really good chance to kind of make his case in midfield, and I think that he has some of the requisite tenacity that you need to really flourish in CONCACAF, but he also does have the technical acumen, also Croatian, very talented young player, and I think kind of the exact profile of player that Marsch wants to work with to be able to show how much he can take them from 1 to 2, if we're saying John Herdman and predecessors took them from 0 to 1. Because like you said, before 2020 or so, before qualifying for 22, certainly Canada was not anywhere near this discussion. right? Which is, considering the GDP of the nation, considering the population, all these sorts of things, it's a bit of a surprise, but they've really made serious strides. So when we talk about like the U.S. and, Brian Skyretta perfectly coined it in like a classic piece on ASN of, the lost generation of U.S. players. That was pretty much between the Michael Bradley and Josie generation. And then this 28-year-olds of this generation and younger at this point, 26 years old and younger, Pulisic basically as the bell ringer of that one. And I think with Canada, you have to look and say it's not just a lost generation, right? It's that they don't really have those 30-something-year-olds who are coming in. So pretty much every single one of these roles has a player who's younger. Jonathan David, Alphonso Davies have been wearing the armband from Marsch. There isn't really that obvious Tim Ream-like guy where you point and say, like, yeah, he's been in this program for a long time, or he's been at the highest level for a long time, and then he came into the program way too late, in my opinion. I digress. With Canada, you also have some promising play from, like Nathan Saliba, I think had a good tournament. I thought that Jebison with his pressing really impressed me. I think that he's someone who could do Marsch has always been kind of flirting with this multi-striker system, and in the second half it was a very curious decision. After you have a player sent off, he just went all in on the forward line. He had 3 strikers on the field at one point for about 20 minutes, including one that he had brought in from the bench, Jebison. And so he's trying to run this kind of like triple forward sort of thing, and you need bodies for that. Frankly, you just need a lot of options so that you can rotate out and you can say, okay, these 3 work best in combination, these 2 always work well, and this one offers something very different, whatever the case may be. But if you don't have width, he was really leaning into the central channel, and it didn't quite work. They didn't really generate any chances of note, so they need the creativity there. And I think that that's ultimately where they're gonna, we were talking before the show about Samuel Piette, and I think that that's kind of the sort of guy that you need to be able to not calm a game down, but to control a game, right? And to have that sort of your hard challenges are coming in the midfield where maybe a referee is going to be a little bit more lenient because these happen all the time. Whereas when it's a winger, everything looks a little bit worse because you don't usually see someone with the build of a Jacob Schaffelberg or a Timothy Weah making those sorts of challenges, and defenders don't usually flim-flom to ground as easily as they did in those 2 cases this summer and last summer, respectively. So I know that these aren't the names that you're asking for, Taylor. I know that these aren't the... yeah,
it's all good. It's interesting.
Yeah, who are the guys under the radar? But I think that this is where you have those sorts of issues, is that it is very difficult to talk about Canada without talking about their most famous and their most important players, right? It's very difficult to have a discussion and not say, would they have done better with Alphonso Davies on the left wing instead of Schaffelberg? Yeah, probably, right? He probably wouldn't have gotten sent off, for one. Would Jonathan David, right? The alternatives to Jonathan David and Kyle Larin missing his penalty and all these sorts of things, right? It is still told by the protagonists, and part of that is just that there isn't that sort of confident depth of we know our first 20 guys on this squad.
Yeah, okay, so that then begs the question. Which manager do you think has learned more about their this specific team or their pool in general? Do you think it's Poch or do you think it's Marsch? Who understands their team
really
better at this point?
You would hope it's Marsch, just because he's had more time and he's had the Copa America, which I think would be a data point that Pochettino would have absolutely loved to have had. Logistics would have never made this possible. I don't think that, one, there was no reason that we really thought Berhalter was going to be dismissed before that tournament, but 2, I don't think Pochettino would have been available, right? That's just Correct. How these things work. Yeah. So at the same point, though, that's where Marsch learned Dane St. Clair is a goalkeeper I trust in big games. That's where he learned that he likes Jacob Schaffelberg on the wing a lot. That's where he learned about Alistair Johnston having such an important role at right back rather than being kind of an auxiliary piece. So I would hope so. But at the same point, in terms of learning the job, it just looks like Pochettino's further along already, suddenly, for the reasons I talked about in segment 1 with the soft side of management, but also it's the nature of this when you're only playing 2 major tournaments in 2025 and then nothing until the World Cup. We have to react to the evidence we have. And the reality is both the United States and Canada lost in the semifinal of the Nations League. Okay, so then you go into the Gold Cup. Well, what happens there? Both teams get a stern test from a Central American rival that they would have expected to have beaten. And in the case of the United States, they are able to weather it, hold their nerve on penalties. They found a goalkeeper who's able to make these saves and not made to look a fool, unfortunately, on a Panenka, right? It was a really tough shootout for St. Clair. I've seen him have some very good ones for Minnesota United in the playoffs against FC Dallas and other teams, but this was not his day. For whatever reason, this was not the most locked in we've seen him in goal. So now there's a question as well. Should you have gone with Maxime Crepeau, right? And so we're back to a goalkeeper discussion there, whereas Pochettino gets 3 saves in a shootout from Matt Freese and afterwards is still saying incredibly nice things about Matt Turner. And it's like, now I know I have 2 goalkeepers who can handle the pressure situation, because when I watched that 2022 World Cup back, one of the only players who I was really confident understood the moment and held his nerve, maybe the only one, was his quote, was Matt Turner. So it's like, okay, so he still trusts the guy, even if he's not playing. And so now it's pretty much a year of Turner versus Freese versus, I guess you could say, Stephen Schulte Brady, right? And just kind of see how that all works out. But I think that Pochettino's maybe learned more about his pool and maybe felt more confident that the decisions he made are ones that he doesn't need to relitigate, and in fact are ones that he can just kind of build upon. And then if he needs to adjust later, that's fine. But he's already made corresponding decisions that can work with those sort of alterations.
Interesting. All right. Let's talk about a bit more about the U.S., though. Let's do so by taking a look at Guatemala first. They win in penalties, as you've already outlined. They have some former U.S. youth national team players. I can't remember. I think Rubio Rubin made a couple appearances.
He made a few. Yeah, I think he made it. He scored
7.
No,
he made 7.
Did he score in 2014? He debuted in 2014 or started, which is just nuts. But yeah, now he's so there. He's so back.
There we
Big
go,
moment
man.
for him.
Who are the players that the U.S. should be keeping an eye on? What is Guatemala's approach going to be? I think I said yesterday, my assumption is that they will be a very deep defensive team, that they're going to frustrate and deny space and basically make the U.S. beat them, but also hope the U.S. gets overextended and try to hit them on the counter. Does that vibe with your experience watching them against Canada?
Yes, and especially the first 44 minutes or so. Like that, it is just wave after wave of Canadian attacking and having to try to dissect 8-9 players in and around the box from Guatemala, who are making life very difficult for that Canada attack. And they did have some openings, especially like down the wing, which is very interesting because I don't think that the U.S. really brought a squad that can create those chances along the wing between the fullback changes and the inability to call in Jedi Robinson or Serginho Dest. So it'll be interesting to see if Alex Freeman or someone else is able to own that space, but there's a lot of cutback cross potential against the Guatemala side. It's ground that they were pretty readily ceding. They do have some nice technical stuff. Aaron Herrera looks very good when he's playing for Guatemala as well, and he's just a very beloved figure in Guatemala too, which is just awesome to see. Again, the crowd was just so cool. Like, he got some of the loudest cheers. He was blowing kisses to fans after his penalty, and everyone was like, this is our guy and whatever. It was just really, really cool. So, for him and Rubio Rubin, ex-RSL players, I guess, are really flourishing with Guatemala. It's much more about the collective, right? And that's where it's kind of that classic, almost like early 2010s Hex feel, where you're just like, I don't really know what to expect from Honduras. And you recognize a couple of their guys from MLS, but by and large, it's a lot of players that you look and they're playing in the domestic league and you're like, oh, it'll be okay. And it's not, right? And I think it was Kenderson Navarro is their goalkeeper, who's stepped in for Nicholas Hagen, who picked up an injury at the end of the group stage. And he's really shaky at stopping shots, in my experience. He's also even more shaky, I would say, at when to converge on a player with the ball. And he might have just been nervous because he was getting his third start for the team in one of the biggest games that they've played in years, which is not always a recipe for success. And he fared very well in the PK shootout, to be fair. But there were a couple of moments where he had to get bailed out by goal line clearances because he would try to run to the wing to collect a ball, and then it would go beyond the box. And so then instead of clearing it, he would suddenly stop and start to backpedal, and there's just an open goal right behind him, right? What he's incredibly good at, though, is his long distribution. Like that famous Iranian goalkeeper from the World Cup who could just launch it with accuracy on a dime every single time into the final third. He is that good with his feet and not his arm, which means it moves even quicker and has even more spin and speed on it, so that when a Guatemalan gets on the end of it, it's just wrecking havoc, and suddenly you've got a 2-on-1. And most of the time, unfortunately, the attackers couldn't get their touch right, and so then Canada's defense was able to backtrack and nullify it. But against the U.S., if they are overcommitting in a possession sequence and Navarro gets the ball and is able to launch it like that, it'll be very, very dangerous for the U.S. For the U.S.'s defense to try to get back into position and nullify that threat.
Are you more nervous facing Guatemala than you were for the U.S. facing Costa Rica? It sounds like you weren't so nervous about Costa Rica. I am always nervous about them because they always seem to present a problem.
Understandable. Yeah.
Do you
Keylor
feel like
Navas is back, right? Like, why would you not be nervous in a little bit? Yeah.
Yeah, as I said yesterday, I was convinced they were going to lose that shootout because Navas is there, because it really can be a crapshoot. So it's a testament to the U.S. that they don't. My question remains, like, do you think this is a stronger opponent than the U.S. just faced in Costa Rica in Guatemala?
I would say Costa Rica is a stronger opponent because I think that they can offer more going the other way at full strength. And I think that they have a more... They've done a lot of roster turnover. I think coming into the just for people who've been following CONCACAF for a while, their second most cap player on this squad is Francisco Calvo, right? And so like they have, when you think of players older than Francisco Calvo, most of them are gone, right? So it's also another sort of kind of reinvented turned over pool. It's a bit like Panama in 22 when Blas Perez and Roman Torres had already phased out and they were figuring out who would be this group that is now among the best under Thomas Christensen in the region, in spite of their quarterfinal defeat as well. I think that with this Guatemala side, they don't really have as much of that, like, who would, to put it another way, like, very crudely, you look at Costa Rica's roster and you maybe find a few guys that you'd say that would be really nice for the U.S. Gold Cup if for whatever reason that's how this thing worked and it was a transfer market. I don't know if you would maybe make as many trade-offs with this Guatemala squad. And so it really comes down to how well they're coached, and they're coached incredibly well, as a lot of teams in this region are, and they have a lot of familiarity with one another, which goes a long way in international soccer, especially in CONCACAF. So it's just going to be down to the U.S. not psyching themselves out. Jesse Marsch basically admitted that Canada's players, beat themselves on the day, and I think as long as the U.S. doesn't do that, that's where that calmness from Pochettino comes into play, and that trust in continuity from the quarterfinal to the semifinal squads on Wednesday. I think that will go a long way, and I would still project the U.S. to advance to the final at this point pretty confidently.
Fair enough. How much is that calmness on display with Pochettino on the touchline? How much is he up coaching? Is he in the director's box or coach's box, or is he more often sitting down projecting calm strength?
He likes to stride in the technical area, especially like as he's just kind of surveying sequences. He's someone who is also comfortable sitting. It's very funny because he was in the same technical area that in the previous game it had Jesse Marsch, and so you can see the contrast of like the mannerisms and the standing, and Marsch pretty much always going to the touch line and having to get held back by the fourth official from arguing calls and all this sort of stuff too. And Pochettino, it's not really that, right? Like he had a really good first touch on a ball that went out of bounds right at the end of regulation, right before the shootout. Generally does cast that sort of, it's not quite Carlo Ancelotti levels of like, here is our like sacred gargoyle that is standing and just like arms folded, whether we score or whether we concede, whatever the case may be, until the result is done and then it comes to life. Like, it's not quite that. No one is. But I was a little more confident watching Mauricio Pochettino in the press box.
How visible was the fatigue as the game went on from a person who was there in the stadium? We heard from a few people who were attending as supporters, and they were saying that around the 70th, 75th minute, you could tell that the legs were going and that changes needed to happen. And they did not happen until a little bit later. Was that clear to you as well?
Yeah, I'd agree with that. We have some very smart listeners, and I've always said so. I would say it was like around...
Butter them on.
I gotta. I got the Discord to gas me up. I need it in my life. No, I think it's the 60th minute or so. You could really start to tell. And part of this is also, keep in mind, tournaments you're so used to every 3 days I go. So you're very used to regenerating it that way. And they had a full 7 days. And so it's pretty much more like a club cycle, but it's a club cycle in a very non-busy time of the year. It's usually Carabao and FA Cups in England, or the US Open Cup, or double game weeks in MLS, right? Like, it's very rare to run into a true 7-day break. And so some of it wasn't just like fatigue, like you usually think of it in a tournament. Some of it was also just rust. Just this really weird sort of like, I haven't done this in a week and it's not going quite as well as we thought. And we're in a high intensity game with kind of a lower level of familiarity and momentum than we're used to, and whatever the case may be. Tyler Adams said he prefers playing every 3 days, which is something I'm kind of surprised to hear, just given his misfortune with the grind of the game these days and the injuries that he suffers. But I digress. You could tell around the 60th minute, and it was especially in midfield, in the defensive line, areas that really matter in these sorts of things. Like, attack is one thing, right? But you can use them as outlets or decoys or whatever. But I felt like it was pretty just desserts that they conceded in the 71st minute when Pochettino had been so slow to go to his bench, and at that point I think Costa Rica, Miguel Herrera had already made 3 subs, and so you could just see that difference in energy, and that was when Costa Rica had its best stretch, was until Pochettino went to his bench.
And for you watching this game, were there players that you would definitely like to see again starting against Guatemala? Conversely, were there players that you would maybe enjoy seeing on the bench instead?
Yeah, Malik Tillman and Diego Luna can work as a tandem. I think that that's something that coming into this tournament I was kind of wondering. And Luna, credit to him, because we've talked about him this year in the context of being more of a central figure for an MLS team and being used to being that focal point and really coming into his own as a result. But he's done very well to be that sort of secondary facilitator who then therefore gets more shooting looks because he's off the ball more, if that makes sense to listeners. And so you have Tillman drawing more attention in the channels and, you know, taking more duress basically, and then Luna is able to kind of drift in and get on the ball and do some really nice stuff, including the goal that he scored and deflected off of an opponent. So that works. Don't break it up. Don't bench him until, I don't know, Christian Pulisic comes back and said the right things on a podcast this time, and whatever the case may be. But like, that is like such a good partnership, and that has been some of the US's best attacking soccer since the 2022 World Cup has come through those two in tandem. Midfield, I did like Luca De La Torre and Tyler Adams a lot. I think Berhalter had a little bit of a difficult game, but I think that he did also have some very good moments where it's very clear that he has a role to play here. But I think that if we were going to try to reintroduce another attacker against Guatemala to try to really put the initiative on them, then maybe Berhalter would be the one who would swap out. But you could also convince me you want to go a little bit more withdrawn and have De La Torre coming off the bench to play advanced in a substitutes role. Players that...
Really quickly, if you're going to bring on like a more attacking player than slim pickings in this squad, would that be Jack McGlynn? Do you roll with Damian Downs? Do you try something else out wide?
Yeah, I guess maybe it would be Downs. This is where I wish I had Haji Wright, honestly. Like, just I think that there could be some good kind of wide outlet sort of stuff, and he's also very good at that drifting game in a very different way than Luna, right?
Is it weird that Brendan Aronson is available and we're not talking about him, or is that sort of...
It is kind of weird, isn't it?
I mean,
it's...
Yeah, I've always rated him. I've always liked him. I think in this tournament and of late, I have seen why maybe he doesn't always endear himself to USMNT managers, put it that way.
Yeah, and I think maybe, like, I want to hear more on that, but I think you also just, like, where does he really fit if he's not going to be that sort of, like, box-crashing 10?
Yeah.
Well, they want something different, and they've got two better fits for that sort of thing between Tillman and Luna. So, like, Aronson on the wing has never looked great. Aronson in midfield, it's not his game. Like, I'm kind of with you. It's just it's very difficult to project. He's revitalized his career a lot this last season with Leeds, but I don't know. Internationally, I'm with you. It's kind of tough to see.
For people who are familiar with the Leroy Jenkins video, it's a little bit of Leroy Jenkins, I think, sometimes.
Yeah, it is.
And I would argue sometimes the U.S. is spending, to continue that analogy, maybe too long doing their pre-battle planning and maybe just a little too slow moving the ball. But then Aronson will just pick it up and kind of in a very frenetic way try to take people on and try to dribble and try to have a shot or a pass. And I think sometimes that's really useful in creating chaos and creating uncertainty and potentially creating opportunities. But it can also mean turning the ball over, going on sort of slaloming dribbles that don't really take you anywhere, but also leave areas to then counterattack. So I think he can provide a level of energy and a level of effort and a level of, on occasion, good chaos. I think he can just also be slightly unpredictable in ways that maybe Pochettino and this squad do not want. So it'll be interesting if he's in there. I suspect it will be either a very similar 11 or maybe it is Jack McGlynn coming in given the lack of options. So that's, I guess, a little bit of a question mark, a little bit of a head-scratcher. Now, Jeff, you can roll with the players that maybe have impressed you less.
Yeah, and I think that there were two, unfortunately. One much more so. I think that Patrick Ajimang as a goal scorer is still a bit of an enigma. I think that I loved a lot of what I saw either off the ball or on the ball outside of the box from Ajimang, which is really encouraging, and that's the sort of stuff that's going to keep him getting looks, I would say, for a while. Frankly, it's the same case people were making about Josh Sargent when he hasn't scored since 2019 for the U.S., you see it with his movement, you see it with his pace, you see it with his strength and his hold-up play, you see it with his ability to just kind of like throw a hip quick to be able to get a defender off of him to create more space and then shove the ball off to someone else. I think that move is like classic, like hold-up striker sort of stuff, and that's not a skill set that he had until very recently. So like credit to Dean Smith and Mauricio Pochettino for unlocking that from him. The hard part is that it's still, whether it's a glancing header on a cross or it is a shot on the ground, it's just still rushed, not confident, not clinical, I guess. And so there were probably goals left. Like, I think you could pretty confidently say there was a goal left on the table just purely when you're looking at the shot array from Ajimeng or the chances that were created in hopes of getting a shot from him that just didn't come off. I think even more so, though, it's weird to criticize a player after they get a goal and an assist, which were the only two goals. Mm-hmm. And yet, Max Arfsten looks so bewildered playing as a left back in a back four, which is such a different role than the converted wing back role he has walked into under Wilfried Nancy with the Columbus Crew. And he's just getting spun around a lot. He's getting bypassed quite a bit. That penalty he concedes is just not, like, it's something where I think if you saw it at the MLS level, you would say that, like, that is an unschooled defender who is not ready to start. And this is a higher level of that. And it was just like a very clear for the rest of the game. Costa Rica was like, well, we're just going to go down that channel because this guy doesn't really know where he's supposed to be or how to like defend like a fullback. And so they're really picking on him. And I think at the end of the day, it's going to be a more advanced role that gets the best out of Max Arfsten, whether it's a wing back or if it's a winger, you know, kind of like that sort of defensive winger trope that has pretty much been lost to the sands of time in this sport. Like, maybe this is a good opportunity for it, but I would say we still haven't found a second option at left back besides Anthony Robinson through this tournament. And John Tolkien, to be fair, I wasn't impressed by his stuff either. So, we're still searching for answers in that spot, I'd say.
You think we're going to penalties against Guatemala, or do you think it's a regulation win?
I think it's a regulation win. Yeah,
right.
I think it'll be closer than the FIFA rankings imply, skewed as they are. But, you know, I think that it's U.S. in the final.
But I think for Guatemala, given the limitations they have faced, like I forget what the scandal was and what the situation was that led to them, like, not being kicked out of FIFA, but not being kicked out of FIFA. Like, they got a huge deduction. There are huge issues with their national team, and I think that it's taken a long time to bounce back, but that they were in a Gold Cup semifinal has to be a source of positivity, even if they don't advance. So
remarkable.
Credit to them.
Yeah.
Credit to Pochettino's men for figuring it out, winning a shootout, getting past Costa Rica. We'll see what happens next. Right now, we're going to take one more break. We'll come back and talk MLS All-Star selections. I look forward to hearing Jeffrey's thoughts. Back soon. Welcome back to the Total Soccer Show. We turn from national teams to all-star teams. Jeff, we have our MLS All-Stars for the upcoming All-Star game against the Liga MX All-Stars in Austin. First off, if you would, for people who are unaware, uninformed, or maybe your co-host who sometimes gets a little confused by this, can you explain how this roster is actually made up, selected, composed, whatever you want to go with? What is the process here? Because we've got, 3 different sources of input?
Yes, 3 of them, and they do happen chronologically. I do wish that there was sort of an overlap thing. It's like, sorry, we all agreed on all 12 picks. We only have 12 All-Stars. Good luck, guys. What could go wrong? But fans will vote on 12. Or they'll vote for 11, right? Because I've seen a lineup graphic too. And then you have players in the league, active players in the league, get a ballot. And media members, I think there's a couple hundred of us who will vote. So it's also like local writers and not just like the whatever 4 writers the Athletic has on its staff, I promise. And so those votes come up with the starting, or it used to be used as the starting lineup. Now it's just kind of like the headliners of the roster. So this is how Lionel Messi gets in. This is how Sebastian Berhalter gets in, cult hero sort of stuff. Michael Boxall at center back. Okay. So you have a dozen players from there. 1 goalkeeper, and then I think it's 4 per line, if I remember right, or maybe it's like a 4-5-2 situation in terms of the breakdown. I didn't actually tabulate that. Maybe I should have been a bit busy. The next group is the coaches group, And this is selected by the All-Star game is coached by the host stadium's team's coach. So I think I put one too many words in there, but that's okay. Everyone understands what I mean. Right. It's Nico Estevez of Austin FC because it's at the Q2 stadium. And so he gets another dozen picks to fill out a squad, basically. And this is where you turn one goalkeeper into three. This is where you kind of get 7 options or 8 options along the defense and the midfield, and you maybe have 5 or 6. And then Commissioner Don Garber comes in and does the final touches. He's the kind of chef who's coming in and sprinkling the oregano over the top of it so that it looks better for the gram and all that sort of stuff. And so he makes his 2 picks of players that he's like, this game can't happen without. And infamously, of course, in 2015, that was calling in Frank Lampard and Steven Gerrard before they played a minute in MLS. Beautiful. And that looked really cynical. And I think he's kind of learned from the backlash to that. And now it usually is either players who are in the transfer window or the shop window, and therefore like this is a good opportunity to see them before they go, or like star players of usually the US or Mexico or Canada who are missing from this game who should be there. And so Chucky Lozano is one of them, and if memory serves, Patrick Agyemang is the other one. And
you are correct. And that kind of fits the 2 categories, right? Because Agyemang is very much in the shop window. Chucky Lozano would be a star player from Mexico. So well explained, Jeff.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. And so now you have this hodgepodge of a roster, and here we go.
Are there any, would you say, like snubs, omissions, players that should have been included, should have been on the roster?
Can I start with the inverse because it explains the snubs?
Yes, please.
I think, and this is something that Jeremiah O'Shawn of Sounder at Heart had replied to me on Blue Sky, and it's been stuck with me for a week, and I think coaches have way too much influence. These coaches, it's just one coach, right? So this when Audi Field hosted it was Wayne Rooney. When Allianz Field hosted it was Adrian Heath. And they get to pick like half the All-Star roster on their own volition. Yep. And last year it was at Columbus, and Wilfred Nancy had gone through this really arduous sort of thing that like they tried to coordinate an interview with me where he could talk through his picks, and then he didn't want to talk about individual selections because he didn't want to insult the players he narrowly left off. And I was like, I get it, but also there goes the piece. I digress. Coaches get to pick half the roster. And so there's no checks and balances system. There's no panel of coaches, which I think would make sense, even if you just have like a rotating 5 or 7 of them, right? And they get to vote, and then majority goes and all that sort of stuff. What I'm saying is there's really no defensible reason that Brandon Vasquez is an all-star this year based on form. And it was... It was like such a glaring, the host team wanted its recent record signing to be an all-star to try to make up for what's been a very, very underwhelming first half season for the team. Did you know that no forward in Major League Soccer is underperforming their expected goals more than Brandon Vasquez? He is the current frontrunner of the Dante Van Zier Memorial XG Underperformer Award. By a comfortable margin, he has left almost 5 goals on the table compared to the chances created to him. And remember, like strikers will usually, if you score a goal, there's no chance the XG was 100, so you will overperform every time you score a goal, right? Like it's not, it's difficult. Yes, you have to be good at soccer, but at the same point, like if you're a starting level striker, you will usually have close to a 0 or above. And so to be leading the league in inefficiency of the chances handed to you, it's shocking that he's on this roster from a merit standpoint. It is purely catering, I feel like, to the Austin thing. So then if you're looking at snubs, who are the best center forwards who didn't make it? If you wanted a famous guy, you could bring in Luis Suarez. If you wanted a guy who was the leading scoring or goal contributioning striker in the league, it's Sam Surridge of Nashville, who is like thrust himself into the Golden Boot race and has 1 fewer goal than Ty Baribo, but also has from the run of play, but also has like better assist totals playing with Hani Mukhtar. So I don't quite understand the logic of that when you could have brought in Christian Arango or Joseph Martinez to give San Jose some love for their resurgence, whatever the case may be. There just were other options. Kevin Denke, I guess you could bring in. I just don't really see how you can bring in Brandon Vasquez here.
You failed to include the words Eric, Maxime, Chupo, or Moteng, but we'll let that one slide. Is there a case for Hugo Kuipers that maybe he should have been involved?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that he's someone who's been handed a lot of chances as well, and he's another one who's like weirdly underperforming his XG, but he also is scoring a lot more goals than Brandon Vasquez, where you can look and say like, okay, maybe it's good marking schemes or whatever the case may be. I think that Hugo Kuipers is a great shout for that. It's where you get to the point where it's like, why? There's no veto, seemingly, because I think that if there was a veto process on the coaches' picks, that's what I learned this year. Because if there was a veto process, it'd be like, come on, man. You also brought Brad Stuver. Because this is the other thing. In baseball, every team gets an all-star, right? And so even if your team is on a crash course to lose 100 or more games, you get a relief pitcher or your catcher or whatever. The coach has to pick one player per team in the league. So in that logic, you can see where Austin would want an all-star, right? And you can certainly see why Brad Stuver is there. I think Carlos Coronel is a more deserving goalkeeper, personally, from the New York Red Bulls. He was my vote on my media ballot. But at the same point, Stuver has been the constant of Austin FC since it debuted, and a beloved figure in the community and a cult hero and above average, like, you know, top 10, 12 starting MLS goalkeeper. So like you look at it and say like, sure, okay. That's okay. Like you only play one goalkeeper at a time anyway. That's fine. I just like I don't really understand having two Austin All-Stars in a year when they're like hugging the cutoff line for the playoffs, and one of them is the most underperforming striker in Major League Soccer this year.
Conversely, who were you excited to see included? Who made you happy that they are now considered to be an All-Star?
I would say that Michael Boxall. I'm glad that he's finally getting his due. It's a drama
Shocking
than like
that he's a Minnesota guy. I can't believe it.
I know, but like this happened last year with Robin Lod as well, where there's like these Minnesota guys who are like very good, and if they were on Columbus, they would be like lauded for like, look at all this stuff that they do that's less glamorous and whatever, but they weren't getting that sort of treatment. So like it was good to see him in the starting lineup as well. I think, frankly, that you know bolsters my confidence that he's a front runner for Defender of the Year alongside Tristan Blackman, who was also voted in at center back. Obviously, everyone listening to this knows I don't think Jordi Alba should have been an All-Star, but that's fine. I was happy to see Yohei Takaoka join the contingent of Whitecaps. I knew that there would be a few Whitecaps.
Goalkeeper in the world.
Like,
Best
and he's
goalkeeper in the world.
just a blast to watch. Like, part of this is an exhibition, so you want to have fun with it, right? And that's where I also get frustrated, because Brandon Vasquez doesn't really play fun striker stuff. But I'll back off this point. I will eventually. Yeah. The voted in contingent looked very best 11 so far on merit, rather than here are the famous guys that I can remember off the top of my head. It seemed like collectively media, players, and fans did a little more introspection with this one. So I was happy to see Diego Luna voted in. I was happy to see Sebastian Berhalter voted in. Alex Freeman voted in. These are these like kind of, I always assume that they're just kind of people we talk about in these circles, but maybe broader. It's more for the nerds and people, the Chads are going to prefer alternatives. And it's just nice to see the nerds and the Chads coming together and agreeing on some of these picks.
Really, if you were building an 11 or an approach, how would you like to see this team composed, selected? What style are they playing? Is it a 4-3-3? Is it a back three? What are you going to go with?
Yeah, I'm probably going back 4, but I'm accepting that I'm not going to ask Jordi Alba to defend a lick, especially because his backup left back is Max Arston, who, as we just discussed in the last segment, I'm not asking to do defender in a back 4 stuff. So it probably is, oh, you're going to love this. My starting, I would probably go Alba, Boxall, Blackman, Andy Nahar at right back, because I think that's very fun, and I think Alex Freeman coming off the bench is a good moment too. Goalkeeper, I'm probably starting St. Clair or Takaoka. Like I'm good with either of those. If you want to give Stuver the first 30 minutes, I have no issue with that either. All three of them, I have like no qualms about the goalkeeper really. Midfield, probably a 3-man. I think it is actually very spicy that this sort of like trio of playmakers between Cincinnati, Portland, and Dallas kicked off because Lucho Acosta wanted out of Cincy, and now it is Evander in Cincinnati getting voted in. It is David DaCosta, Evander's replacement in Portland, getting a coach's selection, and it's Lucho Acosta watching the All-Star game on a Wednesday night. There's just something about that's just like such a nice next chapter of this sort of story. But Jeppe Tverskov at defensive midfield, Sebastian Berhalter as kind of a box-to-box guy, and Diego Luna as a number 10 is probably what I would want to see. But also, if Luna is pretty tired coming back from an extended Gold Cup run now at this point, let's start Evander or Philip Zinkernagel. I'm good with that too. And then a front 3, you've got to play Messi if he's available. So that's your kind of roster building handicap here. And so I want him kind of on a right wing doing number 10 things. Which is where Andy Nahar on the right really helps, because he can provide that width. We're not defending. That's the other thing. We are not defending in this game, and I think that everyone knew that. which is good. Anders Dreyer on the left, I'm putting in over Denny Bouanga, and then at striker, I want to make fans see Ty Baribo, because I think a lot of people aren't watching Philly. So I also think, by and large, the leading goal scoring striker probably should start the All-Star game. It's one of those things where it's like, we can overthink this and I can say it's a 1-goal margin between him and other guys, but it's like, if you're winning the Golden Boot race, you should probably be starting the All-Star game. I think that maybe should be another squad building handicap.
With that in mind, are you surprised that Brian White is here? I think he's 9th on the list, though I think he's joint maybe 8th with Messi and Arango and a few other players.
Yeah, I mean, like, a little bit, because again, like, I was surprised Suarez wasn't on this at all. Like, I just kind of assumed he was another one of those guys who would make it. But I think that the narrative around Brian White and the story of Brian White's importance to this Vancouver team has reached that sort of folk status where it carries extra weight over 2 goals here or there, right? And they've played a couple fewer games, I think, still, if I remember right. They might be catching up pretty quickly. But I think generally, when voting started, keep in mind also that a lot of fans, media members, and players, which is, the people who vote in people, right, for the All-Star game, will vote pretty much as soon as the ballots come, because they're just excited to have something to vote for and something to pick, and to build rosters is just a fun exercise we all like to do in our free time, so let's do it for the All-Star game, right? And so at that time, Brian White is closer in the Golden Boot race, and they are still active in CONCACAF, and the final hasn't happened yet, so everyone is just like, the Whitecaps, right, in all caps, with 5 exclamation points and a 1 in the middle of there accidentally, because we're so excited. And Brian White was voted in. He wasn't a coach's pick, right? Yep. So it's one of those things where it's like, okay, if he wasn't one of the top 4, so this is where they put their 4th players. So they had Ty Baribo, Denny Bouanga, Lionel Messi, and Brian White along the forward line. And so I think it does make sense. If it was like a tie between Brian White and Bouanga or something like that, why split hairs? Let's just throw them both in.
Fair enough. One or a couple final questions for you that transition us into some news. Is Timo Werner an All-Star at this time next season?
He might be, honestly. Like, I like the fit. So for those, Tom Bogert broke it first, and then Seb Stafford Bloor and I, our correspondent over in Germany, had a little bit of detail as well about Timo Werner being in talks now for weeks or months with the New York Red Bulls. It was very clear Tottenham wasn't going to pick up his purchase option. It was very clear that Leipzig didn't really have a role for him anymore, and so New York had made sort of some inquiries last summer as well, up until Tottenham decided to extend its loan with like some kind of restructured terms from the previous year instead of doing the purchase option they'd had on him initially. I think that he could fit very well. He also could help your boy Eric Maxim Choupo-Moting even more, because then he can do much more of the upfield running and have someone who will maybe be a little bit behind him. He's not... I know, like, for all of our banter about him, we can agree that he's a bit slower than Timo Werner, right? Yeah. Yes. Eric Maxim Choupo-Moting is definitely slower than Timo Werner. And so, like, if you have that sort of cutback play, usually you're looking for who is my central midfielder who's in that spot. But if you have your striker who is a very good finisher still, great, cool, that works really well. I think Emil Forsberg will appreciate a little bit less responsibility and having an outlet that he's played with before that he can pass to on the wing. I think he's really built a good relationship with Lewis Morgan. So I think that front 4 is immediately like one of the strongest and most balanced, if most veteran, that you have in Major League Soccer right now. And it's not like old. It's not Inter Miami. So I'm choosing veteran because I think that there is a good balance of like peak year players and kind of twilight year players, as you would maybe call it in squad building terms. I think it could work.
What do you think could hold it up? What do you think could prevent it from happening?
If there was a club... See, this is interesting, too, because it's always very hard to gauge how interested... When you have a player who is not, like, in the twilight years, who is linked to MLS and is in serious talks with them, generally there is that sort of expectation that, okay, but if a team in the Europa League level came in calling at the last minute, that would probably turn their head. But given the career that Timo Werner has had, where there's been all of this sort of like pressure thrust upon him and all of this jeering across stadiums in England and sometimes in Germany too about his finishing and all that sort of stuff, like this might actually be a case where he does want that total change of scenery and to test his adaptability and try something different in his career while he's still close to the height of his powers and all of that sort of stuff. And Anders Dreyer's doing it, why can't I, or whatever. So I think the holdup maybe would be more from like a finances side, which is so funny because it's taking cash from one pocket and putting it into the other pocket at this point with Red Bull football. And so I don't really know. I guess maybe the big thing would be if it's a loan with purchase versus an outright transfer, and is New York getting cold feet about that? But, every side of the deal, because we did have contacts in Germany, we have contacts around the camp, and we have contacts around the Red Bulls. Every side of it is like very pleasantly calm and optimistic that this is going to come through, which is also encouraging to see.
If Werner were to call Emil Forsberg, his former Leipzig teammate, obviously, do you think he's getting rave reviews, positive reviews, mixed reviews? What do you think Emil Forsberg is saying about playing for the Red Bulls in Major League Soccer?
I think Forsberg's going in his ear and just warning him the press box at Red Bull Arena, now Sports Illustrated Stadium, used to be much better, and now, unfortunately, it is tucked in the corner and not field side. No, I think it'd be mostly positive reviews, right? Like, there's probably some stuff about the travel in the country and the physicality of play and some of the challenges that don't get fouls and whatever the case may be. I'm sure there would be some of that, and I think it would be deserved. But by and large, I think Forsberg has had a good time here. Obviously, the run to MLS Cup doesn't hurt. I don't think his form has quite been as good as his kind of best man on MLS Cup team cachet last fall really mandated. I thought it was more of a Lewis Morgan thing than a Emil Forsberg thing, but that's neither here nor there. I think that tandem would work very well in MLS still. And so I think that he would probably be like, yes, come join me. We could do great things together.
There we go. Final question for you.
Yes.
Will we see Olivier Giroud play in Major League Soccer again?
With the Galaxy on loan from wherever he's going? Is it
Let's
Lille?
hope. Let's hope. That's the goal, right? I mean, he's a free agent now, right? Could he sign with the Galaxy straight up?
Yeah, he could. Yeah, because they would have had to been terms of buyout and contract termination, stuff like that. So it could happen. It's a non-zero chance that he ends up with the LA Galaxy. You heard it here first.
Are you surprised by how it's gone? Are you surprised that it hasn't been more successful? That he's out without much fanfare?
Not really. I mean, like, it was deserved on merit, right? Like, it was a fit that seemed more of a sweeten the pot for Griezmann to come in, and you have Hugo Lloris as well, and then Griezmann stayed with Atleti for 2 more years, right? And so I'm not surprised because tactically it was always a very suspect fit. He was never going to get that sort of like gradual build-up on a team with 65% possession where he is able to be involved in 3 different phases of the sequence, including its shot. That's like peak Giroud sort of stuff, whether it's Arsenal or Chelsea or AC Milan or France. Like, that is how he operates at his best. And so that was never going to be the case with Steve Cherundolo. They never even really tried to alter it, and to be fair, they couldn't because they have Denny Bouanga, who wants to play a very different style of attacking soccer. And so that fit never made sense to me. I think that the Jeremy Abobasis and Nathan Ordez's, who have been starting over him, that's a better fit because they're more of that kind of all-around. They're not on the field because they're only looking for goals. They're also doing good off-ball things and defensive stuff and whatever, passing structures. So I'm not surprised. I guess if there is a surprise, it is that both sides had the humility to admit this just isn't going to get fixed and we just need to part now instead of running out my contract, considering how much Giroud was on. That's noble, and I don't think that we've seen that from a lot of designated players in this league, frankly. So that's maybe my surprise, and it's a pleasant one, which is nice.
He's going to become a DP for DC United, isn't he?
Can't wait.
Oh, boy. Well, when that happens, if that happens, we will have Jeff back to talk about it for sure. For now, Jeff Reuter, thank you for talking a lot about Canada and the U.S., a bit about the All-Star selections, and an even tinier bit about Timo Werner. It's all greatly appreciated.
Of course, yeah. And I hope Joe and his band of outlaws are enjoying their time in South Dakota. And I can't wait to hear his tales of triumph.
The outlaw Joe Z. Wales. There we go. We nailed it. We nailed it in the end. Listeners, I hope you enjoyed a pun to round out the episode. I know I did not. We will talk to you again very soon.